I just wanted to talk a little bit about an aspect of ARES that we don't talk about too often, the public service aspect, helping out at races and fundraising events and parades and other kinds of things like that. I was licensed in 2015, and I started to get involved early on with some of the local events back in Connecticut. But I wanted to do something to help support the Boston Marathon after the bombing in 2013. So I took a jump and went to volunteer in the 2016 Boston Marathon. It was a really big event and a bit of a challenge, but it was very rewarding. And I'm going to talk about that experience here and hopefully encourage some others to volunteer for public service events when the opportunity is available. So Cliff helped a lot with spiffing up the slides and putting the recording together. I really appreciate the help, Cliff, and go ahead, please play the tape. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jeff Schwartz, KC1DWP. For this month's ARES presentation, I'm going to share with you what it was like to be an amateur radio volunteer at the Boston Marathon. As trained radio operators and members of an ARES group, I hope you are encouraged to volunteer whenever a public service opportunity presents itself. Where are ARES volunteers utilized? Well, at both local and major disasters. After last year's tornado, WCARES was asked to send radio operators to a neighboring county to help support their radio operators. Many of you are aware of the extreme damage following the hurricane in Puerto Rico. You may not be aware of the support amateur radio volunteers provided. This, in fact, is the scheduled topic at next month's ARES presentation. Public service events is another area where ARES volunteers provide an important communication support role. Jack and Back is a good example here in our local area, but I'm here today to talk about the Boston Marathon. This is a public service event that rivals the scale and complexity of a disaster. Much credit goes to the Boston Athletic Association, the Communications Committee, the amateur radio leadership team, and all of the radio volunteers who helped to make it a success year after year. There were over 27,000 runners at each of the 2016 and 2017 events. The level of organization and planning for the radio communications component alone is mind-boggling. There are large volumes of documentation, procedures, and protocols specific for Boston Marathon radio support. But I have to tell you, to have had a very small part in helping this event to successfully continue was one of the most rewarding volunteer experiences I've had as a radio operator and ARES member. This is what it looked like when the first wave of runners came by my staging area. The course is divided into three segments: the start, the course, and the finish. The start has its unique challenges, clockwork timing to coordinate large groups of runners. The course is 26 miles long with medical and hydration stations scattered throughout. The finish has a full-blown medical field hospital and the need to maintain runner flow to the exit. Radio operations were organized similarly, divided into the same three segments: the start, the course, and the finish, with an additional fourth segment, transportation. Each segment had separate and multiple radio nets. This is the early morning briefing at the bus depot where some of the radio volunteers were assembled. The transportation segment used two types of buses: medical loop buses, I'll talk about now, and also express buses. I was assigned to one of the medical loop buses. These are small buses or passenger vans that shuttle runners from medical hydration stations to the express bus staging area. There are many buses all running short loop routes. They serviced runners with lower level medical issues or otherwise needing transportation to the finish area. The bus was staffed with a driver, an EMT, and a radio operator. Here's our bus. The EMT is standing outside. There I am. And there is the bus with an ambulance at a staging area. This is the view from the closest we could get to the route. The bus had to stay back, wasn't allowed to enter the actual road. This is the start of the race where the support vehicles are going through clearing the route. You can see in the circle in the distance is a white tent. That's the medical hydration station. The role of the radio operator in the loop bus was to communicate our approach and let them know we were there to receive any runners they would have. And we would make arrangements to walk the runner with the EMT if necessary from the station to the bus. Here's a look at one of the medical hydration stations, cots, drinks, and personnel. In 2017, there was an additional level of security provided by blocking the access roads with snowplows. Express buses were the second type of transportation. These were large buses taking runners directly from the bus rendezvous point to the Boston Finish medical area. There was a separate radio net there on Boston approach, taking over handling the bus approach into Boston. It was staffed with a driver, multiple EMTs, and an amateur radio operator. This is what the express buses looked like. This is what they had to deal with approaching downtown Boston as they were making their way to the finish area. There was a lot of effort put in by the organizers to provide training and lots of documentation for the radio operations. One of the most frequently reinforced concepts was to maintain a strict listening watch. Also, due to the very large volume of radio traffic, a rapid exchange hybrid protocol was allowed when conditions permitted. The net would automatically revert to a standard directed net when urgent traffic is declared or operations transfer to public safety control. Here's an example of what the rapid exchange protocol looks like. It's an air traffic control style exchange. So in this example, the medical station Mike 18 Alpha is contacting Net Control Operations Center to indicate that they've activated. So it would go like this: Mike 18 Alpha activated. Net Control would say Mike 18 Alpha, may or may not add acknowledged, and then finish off with a call sign KA1DEF, eliminating some of the steps in a standard directed net. Some of the observations following the 2016 Boston Marathon: the bus numbering system was changed by the bus company without discussing this with the radio operations organization. It was a lot of confusion at the assignment of buses. We went to buses that were not of the type we were expecting. So I was expecting to go to a loop bus, and the number I was assigned to because of this shift of numbering put me on an express bus. I had all my equipment, all my gear, everything set up for a loop bus, and I had to quickly make a shift to get ready for an express bus. But it ultimately got sorted out, and after climbing through the window a couple of times, putting mag mounts up and down, I moved back to the loop bus. Also, one of the two repeaters dedicated to handle the large volume of loop bus traffic failed. Radio operators had to switch to the working net. Net control operators did a superb job handling the increased traffic volume on the single repeater. In 2017, it was a much smoother start, much improved over 2016. But again, one of the two repeaters, the same one, failed again. And in addition, there was increased security with the use of snow plows as barriers, and that caused additional effort to get runners from the medical hydration station to the loop bus. Some learnings: be flexible, anticipate adjustments, bring gear to cover a shift of assignment, program the entire communication plan into your radio. Be familiar with plans and protocols as a whole, not just for your pre-assigned role. I knew the role, the protocol, the assignment for the loop bus inside out before I got on there, but I had at least some familiarity with the requirement of the express bus. There was a need to shift frequencies and repeaters as you approached Boston. There was a tunnel to deal with. So I was able to get myself ready to do that if I needed to, but I was able to switch back to the other bus. But having all of that in your radio is important. One other thing, it's a little comical. Make sure you are where they are when they hand out the lunches. With all the commotion of the bus numbering system, and moving back and forth from the express bus to the loop bus, I missed the lunch, but I did have something with me to eat, so it wasn't so bad. Bring what you need for the entire day. If you're in the transport segment, you won't be able to get back to your car. Also be aware of security protocols. The transport segment allowed the needed equipment, which was heavier and bulkier, to get onto the bus. We were able to park in the depot and bring our gear right onto the bus. But other areas required transparent backpacks or just carrying what you could carry on your person. Bring a mag mount antenna that's short enough to clear the tunnel if you're going to be on the express bus, and bring a pizza pan or a cookie sheet and gaffer tape for the mag mount if the vehicle is not metal. Also, earphones were important, a lot of noise in the vehicle. And most importantly, volunteer. This is a list of some of the documentation. As I mentioned earlier, it's extensive. A lot of effort goes into planning for this and operating this event. And I also put in here a reference to a couple of YouTube videos. Many people are interested in the 2013 marathon experience. I was not at that, but I put this in for folks if you're interested. For those of you watching this video, I'm happy to answer any questions if you care to correspond. My email address is kc1dwp@arrl.net.
Does anybody have any questions for Jeff?
Jeff, do you know who the COML was on that project? That must have been quite a communications plan.
I don't know who the COML was, Phil. It was there were about 270 radio operators. There were many, many people involved in this. And the lead group was an experienced group that had done this for several years. And I don't recall their names offhand, but it was a very, very well organized operation. They clearly had put a lot of thought and learning from doing this year after year. There, in fact, was a day of training out in Framingham that the radio operators and the medical personnel attended jointly. And I remember the day because it was a day daylight savings time took place, and it was a long drive from Connecticut to Framingham, so it was really early in the morning. But they started us out all together, and then they would switch, and the medical personnel would have a special training alone. And the radio operators would meet just with the radio folks and go through a training and a briefing.
I think you made a really good point about having your radio program with all the frequencies for the entire event. You know, as you pointed out, in both years, they lost a repeater and you had to shift frequencies, and the unexpected came up, the old, plan for the unexpected, but don't count on it.
Right. It was quite a surprise that first year when they changed the numbering system, and I found myself on one of those express buses. My mag mount antenna would have scraped the tunnel on the top of that bus. It was long on purpose for the distances needed for the small bus on the loop route, but the large bus, it wasn't going to make it through the tunnel, so I wasn't sure how I was going to deal with that. But I had it up there, and I had everything. I switched my my program frequencies to the ones needed for the express bus assignment, and it was a whole different issue in terms of notifying the approach folks how many runners we had, what their injuries or their condition was, how many wheelchairs they would need to load the people off the bus at the finish. So that was a whole different assignment. But I had read, there was tremendous documentation, and I knew what I needed to do. I just didn't have it down pat in advance. But it was good to have the whole comm plan programmed in, because even the failure of the one repeater, they had one repeater set up for one side of the road and the other repeater set up for the other side of the road on those loops. And you had to, and it was the repeater I was assigned to that failed, so I had to switch to the other one.
Did you use an HT or a mobile unit, or what kind of radio?
I used a mobile. Really, for the transportation segment, they advised using mobile radios, and in fact, it was one of the reasons I went this direction was because I was able to park, which is in itself something important in Boston, but I was able to park my vehicle near the buses and then load the gear on. So I had an FT857D that first year, then I got an ICOM 5100 that I used the second year.
How did you get power? Did you bring a battery or vehicle
I
power?
had a huge battery. I was going to be on the bus all day. I had a 30 amp hour sealed lead acid battery in a Pelican case with an Anderson power pole connector coming out of it. So I was well powered for the day.
Yes.
I had an HT also, you saw in the picture, for when I was mobile out of the vehicle, so that I could stay in communication. That maintain strict listening watch was really critical.
Jeff, you mentioned the local things that we do, Jack and Back, which happens to be October 16th and 17th this year. The other thing is the Harpeth River Ride. Does anybody have any word on, are we going to do that this year?
Haven't heard anything, Paul.
Okay.
Yeah, these events, I had a chance to learn with several local events, triathlons and 5K runs and local events back in the area where I live. So it was a good experience. It was a good way to get into it. But the Boston Marathon was a whole different ball game. It was really complex. We had protocols on how to request an ambulance if needed. There was a lot of planning that went into this. It was a really a well organized, well run operation. And it would be great if we had more local opportunities. I don't know, how many we have. I know Paul just mentioned Harpeth River and Jack and Back. And once the COVID situation clears up more and we have more events face to face, it'd be great to have more folks get involved when the opportunity presents.
Well, whenever we've had the Harpeth River Ride, we've always had a good turnout. And that was, what was it, 25, 50, and 100 miles, Jack? Was that what it was? Somebody remind me.
They had, the last time that I was involved, they had 4 tracks, and there was like it was like a real short, like a 10-mile run. It was also a run as well as a bike ride. And then there was like a 25-mile, there was a 50-mile, no, 60-mile, and then there was a 100-mile track.
Right. And several times the route for the 100-mile required a portable repeater down in the area because, as you know, Williamson County is not flat. But I get, no, go ahead, Cliff.
Did have they had a lot of documentation, so there was a lot of reading, and one of the operators had written kind of a manual on what to expect, which was a really valuable document. That was one of the documents listed at the end of the presentation. Some of those documents are listed as restricted, that they weren't allowed the public to have access to, but I think that one in particular might be available online. It'd be interesting reading. But as I mentioned, there was a training day set up the day that daylight savings time went into effect in advance. And it was a face-to-face meeting in Framingham, and they had a big briefing for all of the medical and the radio folks together. And I think the first year they had the head of the state police, Massachusetts State Police, give a presentation on safety considerations and what to expect in the event something occurred. But then after they did the joint training discussion, they broke us off into separate groups so that the medical personnel had a more specialized training for how to deal with things like exhaustion and dehydration, muscle cramps, other things that they might routinely expect. And we had a separate briefing just with the radio operations group where they talked about procedures and, excuse me, and some of the documentation that we needed to go through. And whether or not there was some discussion whether the EMT would be calling for the ambulance or whether the radio operator would be calling. The bus driver had a commercial radio also, so there was a little bit of confusion about who was communicating what. We would get that straightened out to make sure everybody knew what the protocol was. So there was a lot of documentation, and as well as that single face-to-face training.
Yeah, for a first-time person, they put you with somebody else, sort of a instructor to get you through the first one? Or
No. I had done quite a bit of small scale public service events, but never the Boston Marathon. And they didn't pair you. There was a lead for each segment. The 4 segments had a lead, and you could stay in communication with that lead in advance if you had questions and discuss any concerns or questions. But you had an opportunity to volunteer for a particular assignment, and I volunteered for the transportation segment. You could pick your assignment. There was no guarantee you would get it, depending on how many volunteers they had, but they did have other more experienced people that you could talk to if you needed to ask a question. But you were pretty much on your own on the bus. The express bus was the same, although because of the confusion of the numbering system, I ended up being on the express bus with another radio operator for the little bit of time that the confusion existed until they straightened it out. And then I moved over to back to the loop bus where I was originally assigned.
Jeff, was APRS used at all during the event?
I don't believe so, but at least I wasn't aware or using it. If it was used elsewhere, I'm not aware. It would have been a good thing to have but there was pretty much a constant communication, letting net control know where we were when we were approaching a medical hydration station, where in the case of the express bus, that was their primary role, was to notify Boston Approach that they were inbound approaching the tunnel. They cleared the tunnel. How many runners they had, what their condition was, how many wheelchairs they might have needed, or if there was more serious medical issues that needed more significant medical attention. That was their role, to communicate that. Any other questions?
All right, Jeff, thank you. That was a great presentation.